right, everyone, welcome to another broadcast of the North Carolina Masonic Research Society. Tonight we're doing something a little special. We're going to have a panel discussion. We have 10 brothers from across North America, from the West Coast to the East Coast, the U.S. and Canada. So we're thrilled to have such a diverse group of brothers to have this important discussion on the state of Masonry. The decline in membership in Masonry has been a hot button topic for quite some time, a few years now, and we are continuing to see that decline, but is that necessarily a bad thing? And what does the future of Masonry look like, especially coming out of a COVID pandemic? What are we looking at membership-wise, attendance-wise? What are our lodges going to look like? So I would like to introduce you to our panelists. We'll start, I'm just looking at my screen here, so I'll go from left to right. We'll start with Brother Kevin Homan out of Leesville, Virginia. We have Brother Joe Martinez, who many of you have seen as a regular contributor here at the North Carolina Masonic Research Society and Refracted Light. Yep, Brother Joe, Senior Warden at Manassas Lodge in Manassas, Virginia. We have Worshipful Brother Ben Wallace from the big city of Troy, North Carolina, past master of Blackmer. Is it 237?
Yeah, 127. Close, man.
128, yeah. So, yeah, it was 3 digits. I knew that much. In Mount Gilead, North Carolina. We have Worshipful Brother Mark Toon, founding member of Lodge Pythagoras and past master of, I apologize, somebody's calling me. Past master of Mark, remind me, and I apologize, what was the other lodge you're past master
of? Cornerstone number 19, Grand Lodge of Alberta.
Wonderful. We have Worshipful Brother Alex Powers out of the great state of Kansas. We have Worshipful Brother Dago all the way from the West Coast in California. We have, let's see, did we lose Brother Brent Kaleta?
No, I'm right here.
You are? Okay, I'm sorry. You weren't showing up on the screen. I thought you had dropped. We have Worshipful Brother Brent Kaleta, past master of Zetland Lodge number 83 in Calgary, Alberta, and member of State College Lodge number 770 here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Have I gotten everyone? I hope I didn't miss anyone. Adam Goldman, there he is. These screens keep moving around. Worshipful Brother Adam Goldman, Grand Orator for the, I started to say great state, but the Washington, D.C. Grand Lodge. So we are thrilled to have Adam as well.
That's right.
All right. So let's jump right into a discussion about Masonry and its declining membership, where we are. The question is that a bad thing? There's a lot of consternation and panicking on the part of some Grand Lodges and a lot of local lodges about ramping up membership. And in some cases, some Grand Lodges even making it easier to become Masons by having one-day classes or eliminating the need for catechisms, things of that nature. So I would like to start with Brother Joe.
Oh, you just want to start right off with the sassy opinion.
I do, yes.
Everybody loves the sass, Joe. Come on.
Yeah.
And just FYI, you're in speaker view on Facebook if you wanted everybody to see everybody. But so let me start with the unpopular opinion. Do I think that Masonry, from a membership perspective, as a social organization, is in decline? Absolutely. You got guys like Brother John Ruark, who will give you statistics, pretty good statistics on the rate of decline and how we are losing more people, losing more members than we're actually gaining year over year in general. But I would answer that question with a question of, what is it that we want as a fraternity? Do we want more members or do we want more Masons? Because if we want more members, we're doing a pretty bad job of it. To your point, there's been a lot of shortcuts across different jurisdictions. And let me also caveat for everybody on this panel, our opinions are our own. They don't represent any Grand Lodge opinions. These are our own thoughts and opinions and ideas. So take them for what you will. But again, I just have to reiterate, do we want more members or do we want more Masons? Because those are two completely separate things. And if we want more members, we're bad at what we do, right? We don't solicit and we don't seek out people and things like that, which has always been a staple of the craft. But if we want more Masons, I actually think that the tide is turning as to what type of Mason we're bringing into the craft and we're keeping in the craft. And, losing members for the sake of gaining Masons, I don't think is a bad thing. Are we going to be an organization in 10 years that can support these gorgeous buildings like you have in Pennsylvania and Detroit and things like that? The answer is I don't know. But are we going to have people that are focused on the more important aspects of the organization as a whole? I would say yeah. I think men look for that. Men have a desire for that, and men really have a need and a want for that. So yes, I think the organization, the way it looks today, is in decline, but I think we're turning into something better and more special and better suited to what men are looking for nowadays.
Well said. Ben Wallace, I just realized we have two grand orators on tonight, Ben and Adam. Ben, in your speech at our annual communication this year, which was a fabulous speech, and I have to commend you because I think you said what a lot of grand officers are afraid to say. You were very blunt with some of your comments about membership and attendance. And why don't you elaborate on that? Because I think you really, or Joe really echoed what you said in your grand orator speech.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and thanks for having me on. Me and Adam have a duel here in a little bit, orator's duel. The point that I was making in the speech that I delivered, the oration, was for a smaller, more profound, more initiatic, order-based, progressive initiatic system. And I'm sure that's why you have me on here, because I talk about that all the time. I'm a traditional observance guy. I'm past master of a traditional observance lodge. I believe in taking it slow. I believe in a close-knit lodge, where we do profound things and talk about philosophy and the whole rich experience that comes along with that. And I think that is the way that I get my masonry, the way that a lot of my friends also get their masonry. And it makes masonry great. The problem is my speech, which was a fabulous pitch for that concept, is kind of a utopian ideal. So it's the way that I live in this microcosm with my friends and my brothers that believe this way, but we live in this huge bubble of the Grand Lodge and ultimately in the Grand Lodge systems in North America, which can't operate like that. They've put themselves in an impossible position because of the membership increase. From 1945 to 1955, we added 1 million members, went from about 3 million to 4 million, topped out in 1959 at just over 4 million. I'm sitting here looking at the MSA numbers, and now we've dropped below 1 million members. They don't have, the last results they had were 18, but we're surely below 1 million members now. So there's this huge fall off, and as you lose members, as you bleed off members, you bleed off money. So Grand Lodges are trying to figure out how to deal with this, and everybody's dealing with it differently. Some are trying to, as you said in your opening statement, make it easier to get members in so they can bring in members to make them good Masons, but also to get their money. And they probably agree more or less, many of the Grand Lodge officers in the United States, with this concept of let's make it nicer and more profound and talk about more philosophical things and only get the right guys in the door and charge higher dues. They probably believe that theoretically, But how are they going to fix that when they have this great big membership with all this real estate that somebody's got to pay for? Who wants to be the guy, the Grand Lodge officer, that says, hey, we're going to cut the lodges by 3/4 and, like, raise dues, like, to $300 or $400 a person, and they can't do it. So this becomes the argument, right? I'll argue all day long for the more profound experience, but you've also got to live with the reality. And I've probably taken enough time right now, but I have some ideas about what they could do going forward. But Grand Lodges need to wrap their mind around this. They all know the problem. They have no continuity at leadership because we overturn every year our Grand Master. Some of them do 2 or 3 years running, but still, that's not real continuity. Nobody has a 10-year plan. Nobody has a 20-year plan. They need to be thinking about that. I yield back the balance of my time.
And I was muted. Anyway, thanks, Ben. I think they were great comments, and I think you hit the nail on the head. There is kind of a utopian idea of what we would like to see in masonry, and we may never see that, but I think we are seeing a pendulum swing, a paradigm shift in the old guard, and seeing a return to some fundamental aspects of masonry that we've kind of swept under the rug for a while. Worshipful Brother Mark Toon, up on your side of North America, up there in the beautiful country of Canada, Alberta, and the Rockies, what's the state of masonry like there? Are you experiencing similar issues, and how are Canadian Grand Lodges addressing that?
Well, we have the same issues that we do with our brothers in the States. I think with COVID, I mean, the reality is we're going to lose 20% of our membership. That's just the reality. The older brothers won't come back, and those brothers who weren't really dedicated Masons will just fall off the radar. I personally am quite comfortable if we shrink as a membership, because the brothers who are left will be dedicated brothers. And we have to watch, we have to guard the West Gate. It's all about quality and not quantity. Who cares if we shrink? The only people who care really is the establishment of Freemasonry, the Grand Lodges. I think the Grand Lodges need more to realize we are going to shrink in membership and adapt to a shrinking membership, and be more focused on, let's get a better quality member. And if we have a good product, and I've always been preaching this for years, if you have a good product, you give good education, you give a really good Masonic experience, you will get members. You don't have to worry about membership. You've got a quality product, and you give a good initiatic experience. I'm the oldest brother in my lodge. The average age is, I would say, 40, and we are a small lodge of 17. I believe we reject more than we accept just for affiliation, because we want to have our lodge to be only members of dedicated Freemasonry. And that's the reality of the future. And I say I'm quite comfortable if we do shrink, because who is left is going to be a Freemason. And I always equate it to, in Masonry, you have two types of Mason. You have the brother who is a paper Mason. He gets his piece of paper, his certificate, puts it on the wall. Then you've got what I call the apron Mason, who takes it seriously. And that's the brother that we need to encourage. And I also encourage younger brothers to make new lodges, open new lodges. It takes 7 or more to get put your papers in to start a new lodge and move forward. Young, new, dynamic lodges. So yes, in Canada we do have the same problems, and the Grand Lodges are all worrying regards to the future. But we have to address the reality. It's going to shrink at minimum 20-25% in the next 2 or 3 years.
I agree with you, and that begs the question. How did we get into this state? Did Masonry grow too fast, too big, too fast? And was it ever really meant to be this massive organization? I'd like to hear from a few. Yeah, I see Joe shaking his head no, and I would agree. But worshipful brother Adam, what are your thoughts?
Well, let me start by saying I like everything I'm hearing so far. I mean, this is it's a real conversation. You know, what makes, you know, masonry. Like I was thinking, I've recently been buying a guitar, and I was thinking, as I'm looking at all these guitars, the ones that the pros are playing aren't the ones that are being mass produced, right? It's not the Gibson that they're, you know, making in Korea, and there's like, you know, they're just mass producing these things. The ones that, you know, Slash is playing, and like the real players, the Mason's Mason, the guy that takes this seriously, not the weekend guitarist, is, you know, he's going to these, you know, Paul Reed Smith, and he's going to these, you know, locally made, you know, high quality guitars. So I'll just start by saying, like, I absolutely agree with that, you know, we don't need the, you know, the numbers. I mean, if you know, that's detrimental to the administration of Grand Lodges, so be it. To your question, no, it was never intended to you know, be what it is currently. It's and what's driving this decline, I think, one of the articles you sent around for us to read previously, I think it quoted I think I hit one of the hyperlinks, and it took us to an article that reminded me of the Putnam book. If anyone ever read the Bowling Alone book by Robert Putnam, who is I think a sociologist from Harvard, and he in his book, you know, he was observing, you know, around I think the 1970s U.S. and he was looking at all the different organizations like the Knights of Columbus and the Masons and Rotary and others, and he but in particular he was looking at you know, bowling leagues, and he says, you know, by the numbers, you know, he's a numbers cruncher guy. He says, by the numbers, there's more bowlers in America than any time in American history. At the same time, there's less bowling groups or bowling leagues, whatever they're called. Everybody's bowling alone, hence the name. And so, so what's driving, you know, this decline in membership? I think, you know, some people, you know, have already highlighted some of it. You know, at one point, the Masons were necessary for insurance, and they were necessary, you know, if Joe was going to lose his job, he needed to make sure he was good with me at Lodge, that if, you know, if something happened and his kids need diapers, you know, the Lodge would provide. But with the New Deal in the 30s, you know, the government displaced lodges, displaced churches, and others. So, so I would say that some of the things that are driving that decline, the decline in bowling and Rotary and everything else, which is a long-winded way to answer your question, but I'm ordered. That's what we do. We give long-winded answers. But yeah, it's, you look at the decline of all those groups, and they coincide with the rise of television, the rise of internet, your Apple iPhones. And so are we going to capture some of those members back? Is there going to be a decline in iPhones? I doubt it. But to Joe's point, and to, you know, I'd say, and then if we can, who cares if we, you know, don't get, you know, you know, the numbers that, you know, quote unquote, we need to sustain ourselves, you know, will become, you know, lighter and more tactical. And the people that, you know, remain, like Mark said, they'll be the ones that we want.
I agree with Adam. If you don't mind me piggybacking off what he said, it's interesting because what would happen if we had 10 potential candidates walking to your lodge once everything opens all of a sudden? You're going to get excited, and are you going to be the lodge that's going to immediately initiate them, or are you going to make him really earn that initiation and slow him down and not get overtly excited that now I get to make up numbers because we've been closed for a year or more, and now we're having some guys interested, so let's hurry up and put him through because now we're excited and ready to go. There was a night where one of our past masters was reflecting, And he said, after 9/11, we had this resurgence in our lodge of a lot of men immediately crashing our lodge and trying to join, mostly police officers and correctional facilities officers. And in one weekend, we did 10 degrees. And I was like, wow, I go, that's impressive. He goes, yeah, you know, we don't do that anymore. Now we space them out once a week, once every 2 weeks, one only. And I'm like, well, that's to give them that experience. But let me ask you something, Worshipful. I go, where are those 10 Masons now? Where are they now? Oh, well, they moved out. They're not around anymore. I'm like, yeah. And if you've noticed the way we've been doing it now by slowing it down, making them earn and value their experience here, they're still sticking around. And we'll see in 5 years if this experiment is really working here at our lodge personally, but I think it will, because they're getting a deeper gratification of the experience as opposed to that social gratification that fueled lodges, created buildings, and it was great at first, but then helped also burn it down. And I think it's our job as the gatekeepers, right, guarding the West Gate, to be cognizant of that and say, no, 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 no. Even though there's really good men coming through the door right now, there's a progression that they're going to have to go through to be able to earn these degrees so they can then pass that on to the future Masons that come to our lodge, because they're going to be running our lodges in the future. Like that article that you sent, Matt mentioned, like 10 years from now, they're going to be the older Masons who are going to be running the lodge. And if their experience was about crash and burn and socializing only, that's the only experience they're going to offer. And this is how we lost this whole educational side to Masonry and the deeper philosophical aspects to Masonry. So in my humble opinion, I think it's important to slow it down and not worry about the quantity and worry more about the quality of men that are coming into the lodges and we bestow with this philosophy that we have here in Masonry. And also, yeah.
Great comments, and I couldn't agree more. And I saw several of the heads of other panelists just shaking, nodding.
Matt,
so,
do you mind if I chime in?
Please do.
All right, thanks. Because actually, Adam, the same thing in that article struck out to me, and it was the line that was many Freemasons see the decline in membership as symptomatic of the overall decline in all voluntary associations in the United States, right? And I do think there is legitimacy to that statement, but I think there's another side to it that in a lot of places Freemasonry is not meeting, and I think Dago hit the nail on the head, and it's the millennial generation, the Gen Xers that are now joining Freemasonry. That's what they're into, and we're not giving it to them. So, to go back to where you started, Matt, we talk about bringing, is it membership? Is it bringing in more brothers? But I think another question to ask is, why do so many men join the craft, come for a few months, and then they never show back up at lodge? As I think Dago highlighted with his example of the 10 brothers who are initiated in one weekend, and we're not giving them what they want. They think they're coming to get one thing, and then they're getting a whole other thing which isn't even remotely close to what they were expecting. I know Joe loves bringing up the kind of, we're just a social club anymore by and large, and I think that's by and large true. Yeah, we have some lodges here and there that really do great stuff, but we've kind of lost that educational way. And I was having an interesting conversation with a Masonic friend of mine. Everybody here would know who he is, but we were talking about committee budgets across the United States, and I'm just going to go over a few figures here. So, in this brother's grand jurisdiction, the Committee on Marketing gets $117,000 a year. The Committee on Membership gets $28,500 a year. Committee on Education, $2,000. In my grand jurisdiction, PR, $14,200. Committee on Work, $19,000. We spend $15,000 on postage a year. We spend $17,559 to lease a copier a year, and we spend $9,150 on education. And I don't think, my opinion is, I don't think it's, meant because people are against Masonic education. I think it's a case of people get, comfortable in what they're used to, and that's how it goes. And leadership needs to have that view of, we're running an organization for the younger generations that are coming in. It's really not for us, it's for the future coming in, because if we're not giving something that the future generations want to partake in, they're not going to join us, and our numbers are going to go down. And John is going to be right. By what's his prediction? 2040 will be the last Freemason. So yeah, I think it's a really complex thing. I don't necessarily disagree that, lower numbers for us are a bad thing, because I think I'm in agreement. I think, we need to be more careful of who we're letting in the West Gate and letting into the craft.
Yeah. Excellent comments. And I will just back up really quickly. I saw someone sent me a message on Facebook. This is the book that Worship Brother Adam was referring to, by Robert Putman, Bowling Alone. Excellent read. You can pick it up on Amazon, eBay, Barnes & Noble, pretty much anywhere, but I would highly recommend that book. Now, Worshipful Brother Brent, I see you really deep in thought, and I see you nodding occasionally, and so I wanted to see if you wanted to jump in and if there's anything you wanted to add.
Sure. Yeah, you betcha. I'll jump in. I think there's two things that we need to look at that need to realize the change is going to happen. Several members of the panel have mentioned it so far, which is, the Grand Lodges and the way that they feel about it. But it also comes down to the lodges themselves realizing that this is going to be a change that happens. I just look at my mother lodge, and I remember looking at some of the stats we had over the years when we were kind of coming into our 100th anniversary, and we kind of looked at our lodge history. We started in 1913, so just before the First World War. And we were, the 20 members that came together to found it. Our numbers kind of stayed that 20 to 30, 40 range up until, 1940 type thing. And then we had a huge expansion, kind of 1945, 55, 65, where the lodge went up to I think at one point we had 250 members in the lodge, right? And then it started dropping through the 80s into the 90s. When I joined the craft in 2010, on the books, we had 100 members. If I take who is actually at the meetings, we take out a certain number that are, like myself, expats that still hold a membership but aren't actually there, all this other kind of stuff. And that number actually came down to about 75 that would legitimately be in the area. And our average attendance was probably about 35, 40 in lodge, right? Now that raw number, when I talked to Worshipful Master today, it's down to about 75. When it's not, because we're not initiating guys. We're bringing guys in like crazy. We have some that are, leaving the craft, some that are leaving the area, all this other kind of stuff. But the lodges reached a point where they built the buildings to handle that size of masonry. The building that my mother lodge in was built in the 1920s. It's an incredibly beautiful building. It was built for the purpose of masonry. It's that grand architect that you look at when you walk into the lodge. It is a beautiful piece of mastery as to everything that you need for masonry in there. And the reality is this, because we're not a religious organization, tax exempt, we pay about $100,000 a year in property tax. So when you start trying to take that $100,000 in property tax, that's just property tax. That's not operating costs of the building. You need to have a lot of money coming in to maintain a building like that, right? Part of that is realizing that may be something that needs to change. The lodge that I joined in North Carolina, technically I think on the books right now there's 27 members, and we don't actually even meet in a lodge building. The lodge physically meets in the lobby of a business. Every meeting, the furniture comes out, gets put in place, the lodge gets set up, we have our meeting, and then it gets taken down. So part of that is changing this mindset that masonry is a building. Masonry is this physical space. We must have this incredibly beautiful place to perform ritual. It's nice, but if you do your ritual properly, you can do it outdoors. We've seen lodges that do outdoor rituals, right? You can do it in the lobby of a business. Brother Dago, there is one of the lodges in San Francisco that up until about a year ago, they were meeting in the library at one of the sports clubs. I think it's Prometheus, I believe it was. I mean, fantastic lodge to visit. That literally meets in a building very similar to the setting behind me right now. And you know what? Fantastic aspects of masonry happen in those spaces. So it's part of that changing of the mindset that a lodge is the membership and not the place that it meets. And it's kind of like when we look at, you know, a little bit on the history of masonry here, 17th century, when masonry began to spread, it consisted of small men who endorsed a practice, a number of ideals that were not the majority opinion, such as religious tolerance and acceptance of scientific ideas, and it attracted a specific member. We move into the 18th century, where it started to see men who are interested in intellectual change, the advancement of new ideas. We had people like Voltaire come into it, Washington, Simon Boulevard. 19th century, it moved into guys who were like Juarez and Garibaldi, where they were looking at, you know, opposing the power of institutional religion and politics in their lives. They were the people who were, in a way, anti-establishment. They were feared by the establishment. They're the ones who fought for freedom, all that kind of stuff. Then we roll around to the Second World War, and I'm going to read a quote here. It's after the Second World War, specifically in the English-speaking world, that paradigm changed. Masonry became part of the establishment, not an elite dedicating to question it. Yes, we could celebrate the efforts of past Masons, but we defeated Hitler, didn't we? And everyone in the English world was endorsing all those Masonic values our heroes fought for. Masons were mainstream. Masons stopped being an elite, which gave the example for social change and became the organization of choice for those who want to improve their social status. Membership skyrocketed, but Masons stopped being leaders and became followers. And being followers meant adopting the paradigm of followers, bowing to social pressure, worrying about becoming the majority, and hence about numbers and changing fundamental principles to conform with the majority opinion. The change of paradigm is long overdue. Let's face it, the reality that our organization was never meant to have the numbers it once did. It was intended to be an elite, consisting only of men who are fired by a desire for fellowship, true gentlemanliness, and moral truth, no matter what the establishment felt about it. It was intended to consist of men who are intimately bonded with other men who are fired by the same desire. And that's kind of one of those things that when you have smaller lodges, it's easier to do. Now, I mean, is it going to be a shame to lose some of these amazing buildings because the reality is it's not affordable anymore? Yes, but does that mean it's the end of Masonry? No. Does it mean that it's a change? Yeah. But here's the thing too, is it's also an auto-correction. It's going back to what we saw at the beginning. And it's really just resetting the course that we were originally on.
It's a normalization. And by the way, for those watching, I have posted a link to the first article that we referred to, which was an NPR article that was actually just published this past Saturday, November 28th, by a journalist, Christiana Silva, with NPR. And it was for the, there was some accurate stuff in there. For instance, we are called Freemasons, but, you know, and, you know, there's a quote in there from Chris Hodap and Brent Morris that I think, you know, are very apropos. But the article that Brent was referring to there was published in the Alberta Freemason. And I've also published a link to that if you would like to read that on there. And I think that's probably a little more appropriate. I think it's a little more spot on as to what we're discussing tonight. And so, Brent, thank you for sharing that with me earlier. I did share that with the panelists because I thought that may be a topic of discussion tonight. Something did happen historically in Masonry, where after World War I, we had this influx of GIs returning from, you know, the theater over in Europe, and they join fraternal organizations such as Masons, Moose, Elks, whatever the case may be. Then just some 20 years later, you had the end of World War II, and you had the same thing happen again. You had another huge influx of these veterans coming in, and they're joining also fraternal organizations, and even forming new organizations such as Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and a number of other military-related fraternal groups. So I want to ask the panel, did that help or did that hurt Masonry? Alex, I've seen you nodding your head a few times. What have you got to say?
Well, I'm gonna back up, if you don't mind, just for a second here to kind of cover a little bit of all of it. So everyone that knows me, I'm a history nerd. So when you approach this from that perspective, it's a double-edged sword. There's a big aspect of this that really sucks, right? Because we are experiencing now, but we're going to continue to experience, especially in the coming years, way more than we have, the face of Masonry changing dramatically. I don't think that's a bad thing. It sucks, but it's not a bad thing. When we get there, we're doing one thing. We're forgetting two things. We're forgetting where we came from and who we were. Now, you got to remember, when Masonry started out, early days on, we weren't big, glitzy glamour that we've came in today to know, right? We met in these spaces above taverns that we drew our symbols on floors, and when we left, we wiped them away because we were, we kept our stuff behind closed doors. It was meant to be small. It was meant to be private. And the stuff that we talked about was valued. That has gone away and been replaced with these big, glitzy, glamoury buildings that you and I have came in today to love and appreciate, and especially being a historian, I love them. I research them. I know so much about them, and they mean a ton to me. But at the same time, that has been the double-edged sword of Masonry, right? Because when we see these influxes, the reason that we see them is out of panic. It's not out of love for Masonry. You've got to understand, when you look at those influx of Masons coming in, as we all say today, many of those people joined the wrong organization. They were brought in on false pretenses and basically turned it into something that it wasn't intended to be. Education has gone out the window. We just don't do half the stuff we did anymore. And the face of it has changed. Now we've got a generation coming back in that wants that. But at the same time, we're fighting because we might not make the rent payment for next month. So at that point, it turns into a business perspective. We need people in here. We need fancy slogans. Masonry is for everybody. And if you look way back, it's not the first time this has happened. It's human nature to act in this fashion and save what means something to you. If we go back to the Morgan affair, we know after that Grand Lodges shut down overnight. I mean, people were in a panic and scared to approach their lodge because if they walked in that door, they were in bad waters with their work, their church, their neighbors, right? So at that point, lodges folded, Grand Lodges folded. And when they come back in, they come in with a different perspective of trying to show the community we're about you. And you see that Freemasonry has always encompassed charity, but charity is also not who we were. Freemasonry has gone from educational and about you to all about them. Everything we do is about you. And, I do a couple presentations on it. It's kind of funny to think about, if you really look at the ritual of opening the lodge, that check and balance system, right? Of who's allowed to be there. You got a guy standing outside the door with an implement of death protecting the lives of everyone in there. It tells you that when this was made, right, that the stuff, the material that was being discussed had meaning. But what happens today in the majority of lodges? We go through that and we have a guy protecting our lives, and we do nothing more than pay the water bill and talk about giving money to the school down the street. Who cares? Why is that not public information? Doesn't matter. So when we approach that, we really got to see the double-edged sword of it. It sucks that we're facing the consequences of losing this mass membership that built us up to who we were. Now we can't afford the bills and we're going to lose these buildings. But those masses of membership weren't always the right individuals for the craft to keep it on the focus that it was intended to be, that the current generation wants it to be, right? So as we've brought in some really, really interesting points, it's important to understand where we came from and who we were when we started out. And even if we lose these buildings, which sucks, I hate to see it happen. The importance is to remember who we are and what Masonry is. Because if we continue down a path that sends it in the opposite direction, we're just doing a continued disservice. So, for me, I think Masonry in one way or another is kind of correcting itself. It's bringing itself back home. And really, it's going to change its appearance and how we see it and know it compared to when we came in. But at the same point, I don't think it's going anywhere. We may not be meeting in fancy buildings. The Grand Lodge system as we know it may take on a whole different face. But there's still going to be people practicing Masonry somewhere, somehow. Some of the first lodges in Kansas started on a hill with the Tyler on a horseback. And there's nothing stopping that. As long as you're covering the real material and you're doing Masonry, we don't necessarily need all that. It's perks. And I hope we preserve it and remember it. But Masonry is the important aspect here. So that's my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I love that. I think you're making an excellent point. And being a historian, I'm going to turn this back over to Ben Wallace, too, for his comments on this, because, Ben, I'm going to use one of our favorite words, one of our favorite three-letter words.
Schism?
Three-letter.
Oh, okay.
Ego.
Yeah.
We look at Masonry historically, and as Alex so appropriately pointed out, there have been these paradigm shifts throughout Masonry, but really after that bubble of World War I and World War II, where we had this huge influx, suddenly we had an influx of dues-paying members, and we started building these Masonic temples and lodge buildings like crazy. If you look at the majority of the lodge structures around the country, the vast majority were built after World War II. Usually in the 50s or 60s. So was there a nearsightedness, or was there an egotistical aspect to Masonry that they just assumed these large numbers were going to last forever?
Yes, certainly. They thought they were doing the right thing. That nobody, when this was happening, this huge influx of people, was saying, "Oh, this might be a bad idea. Maybe we're letting the wrong guys in." They were just thrilled. They just thought everybody was smelling what they were cooking, right? And they thought they were on the right path. Turns out now, obviously, that they're not. And now the ego problem is nobody wants to say, "Hey, we've got to turn you away," or because you don't think you're a right fit for us. We're all beaten tonight. We're all beating the TO drum, the traditional observance drum, or at least something very similar to that in the things we're talking about. We on this panel have all found the right answer, we think, for Masonry. All these things we're talking about tonight, smaller, more profound experience, all of that is the answer for us. The problem is that we're like 0.5% of the Masonic population. So it's a small population who thinks that we found the right answer. I think we found the right answer. So the easy thing to do is for us to operate in this microcosm within the macrocosm of Freemasonry as a whole, and just say, well, we found the solution and we're just going to do our thing. And the Grand Lodges can figure this out on their own. And they will. They're going to figure it out one way or the other. They're probably going to figure it out when their numbers get low enough that they really have a crisis, because crisis is usually where change comes from. The other way to do it is to be proactive and really have some sort of a plan, but I don't really see that happening. What I can't do is sit around and watch that, though. because I think that if we could get Grand Lodges to buy into these TO or TO-ish concepts, that we could facilitate the Grand Lodges getting closer to our model, which would solve all their problems. Then they would have smaller numbers, but they would have the more dedicated members that Mark was talking about, who are willing to pay $300 or $400 or $500 a year dues. And then they could keep their buildings because they would have guys that cared enough to pay for it. The guys that they have now, the corpus of the membership, whenever you talk about raising dues $10, goes into the fainting spell and says that we won't do that, and the leadership doesn't really want to mandate it. So the question is, how can we, who's found the solution, help the Grand Lodge to see that this is the solution and move them in that direction? That's the question to me, and I don't know the answer.
I think Joe, you had something you wanted to throw in there, jump into the fray.
You couldn't tell by the faces I was making that I had something to reply to. Well, first for Ben, I mean, everything you said, and you know me, I completely and wholeheartedly agree with. I think that, and I want to take don't take it as a slap on the back, okay? Yeah. I think that the common answer to what you just said for grand jurisdictions is that it's a generational thing. Well, I think that's a bunch of shit. I'm sorry. It's not a generational divide. I think that the way the system is set up, it's too heavy for it to support itself anymore. To do that slow repair that you're talking about, Ben, how bringing, the more palatable parts of our ideas to, a grand jurisdiction. I think it's too heavy for it to functionally work in that way. So to Alex's point, is the Grand Lodge system going to look different in 20 years? Absolutely, because to your point, they have no choice, right? It's going to change in such a dramatic way that it's not going to look the same way that it does now. But I don't really see that as a bad problem, And I think to your point, and stepping away from, the TO label, even though these are TO concepts, Mark hit it on the head at the very beginning. Starting small lodges, and Alex brought it up, that is what the purpose of a lodge system was for the brothers, is small, concise group of people that intimately know each other well. One of my lodges, my mother lodge, we have 200 people on the books. I can tell you right now, 150 of those people I've never seen before in my life. I couldn't tell you what they look like if they walked down the street. I wouldn't know if they were Masons or not. And this sounds terrible, but I don't think I'm losing anything by not knowing these people, right? Because number one, they're not there, they don't participate, and they're not a part of my intimate circle of trust and friendship that I think, and we all think, is what makes a brother, And I mean, I'm gonna, Brent was whipping off some amazing quotes. I'm gonna take you all the way back to Aristotle, right? So Aristotle talked about different levels of friendships, right? He had friendships of utility. We're friends with people because they're friendships of convenience, or, whom we have a work relationship with or something like that. Then we have the friendships of pleasure, where we simply enjoy someone's company. But then you have friendships for the good, friendships that make you a better person and make that person a better person, where you actually have a quality relationship with someone. And both Aristotle and modern psychologists, they're the first ones to tell you, you can't be intimate friends with 200 people. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're as handsome as Adam Goldman or as dashing as Kevin Homan. You cannot have intimate relationships with a lodge of 200 people. It's impossible, right? We're not built that way as human beings. But you can have intimate relationships with smaller subsets of people. And going all the way back to what Mark said, I think that's when lodges were, quote unquote, most successful for what we're trying to impart as a craft, is having that small, intimate group of people, 20, 25 people at the most, that are able to support each other and intimately know each other from that higher level of friendship that's more than an acquaintance, or the guy I'm having dinner with, or the person I'm doing, charity golf with. And, just to dovetail on that, I say this all the time to new Masons or new people that want to come and join the lodge. The first thing I tell, and I get stink eye from other people and I don't care. I tell them, we're not a social club. If you want a social club, go join the Moose Lodge, go join the Elk Lodge down there. They're allowed to drink, go there. We are a brotherhood that do social things together, but that's a byproduct of the brotherhood and the initiatory aspect. Same thing. People, when they say they join, oh, I wanted to be charitable. We're not a damn charity. Okay, last time I checked, at least in all my jurisdictions, we're not 501c3s. Okay, so I can't tax exempt a damn thing, right? We do charitable things because I think, are the sort of people that love to give to our neighborhoods, our communities, our places of worship, and as a byproduct of being that higher form of ourselves. And the last thing I'll say is, we're not a dinner club. I've eaten at some of your lodges. There is nothing to smile about with some of the menus in Masonic lodges. So we're definitely not a dinner club. And, but going back to what Ben said, and then I'll shut up, go to a good table lodge or a great festive board. I mean, it was not just eating, you're having a profound experience while sharing a meal, and doing those kinds of things. Again, you're not sitting down and having green beans and spaghetti. You're having a profound experience with a close group of people that you trust with your life, and we don't do that anymore. I think we're starting to, and the overall system is going to come to a place where it's going to conform to our way of thinking, but it's not going to be without pain and heartache and strife. But I think that's okay.
So, Joe, are you saying, I may be reading between the lines here, but are you saying that you don't appreciate green beans at every meal?
You've never known me to be a subtle person, but no, I hate green beans. I think they're the worst things on earth, and I think they should be banned in Masonic lodges. So,
yeah, and I will say this: I think Masonic lodges keep green bean farmers in business, honestly. But we've used the term traditional observant or observant masonry several times, and we do have some viewers over on Refracted Light, the Facebook group, who are in other countries. Brother Steve O'Donnell in Scotland. Brother Steve, it's great to see you here tonight. Let's talk a little bit about traditional observance and maybe how that plays a key role in the future of Masonry. I'd like to turn it back over to Worshipful Brother Mark Toon, because being a founding member of a observant lodge there, Lodge Pythagoras, I think that's very key. And I'll just say this: Brother Jeff Davis over on Facebook commented that he thinks the shift towards traditional observance lodges would help stabilize membership numbers. He said in his experience, the TO lodge, or traditional observance lodge, is what he expected when he became a Mason 25 years ago. So, Worshipful Brother Mark, what say you? You're muted, Mark.
Now can you hear me? Okay. Yes, I 100% agree. There's going to be a paradigm shift in Freemasonry if we're to survive to more of a traditional lodge. I'll just give you an example of our lodge. We're in a small satellite town outside of Calgary, Alberta, and we meet in a small lodge hall. We have 17 members who look forward to every meeting. Every meeting is an event that all our brothers look forward to. For every brother, we normally have 98%, 95% attendance. We have a couple of brothers who are first responders, so sometimes cannot get to lodge. But for every brother, we normally have 2 visitors. So we normally have 40, 45 brothers in lodge. Every meeting is a formal festive board, 6 o'clock cocktails. We're all formally dressed. 6:30 to whenever. In our bylaws, we state we tile after the festive board. So sometimes it's 7:30, sometimes it's 8:30, because we're all having the atmosphere in the festive board is just magic. And we may have a small lecture. We have all the traditional toasts. We go into lodge. We only do education. We don't have no business at all. So everybody knows what the education is, and we have, our meetings are just very good. We have chain of union at the end. We have moment of silence to tile our minds before lodge. And we have been accused of being elitist, and we don't deny it. Yes, we are. This is what we want Freemasonry to be. And we have 17 members. We initiated one member in the last 2 years, took 2 years because it's a 2-year program. We have one more coming in. We have about 5 who want to affiliate, but out of the 5, maybe 2 will allow in because they have to fit the lodge. We don't want anybody to join just because they want to be part of the lodge. So this is the future of Freemasonry, is small groups of members who are brothers. And I say that profoundly because it is a brotherhood. It's not meat and potatoes, festive board, or a social club. And this is the future of Freemasonry. And we will shrink, but the people who are left will be true apron Masons, and that's the future. And we have to realize, and the Grand Lodges have to realize, this is the future. It's the only future for Freemasonry.
Yeah, very good. And Brother Dago, I think you want to jump in.
I agree with what Joe said and with what Brother Mark said. I think our Grand Lodge has kind of zeroed our Grand Lodge kind of zeroed in on that idea a few years back in promoting smaller lodges and encouraging Masons to break off of their larger lodges and create smaller, more concentrated lodges, because the lodge, Pythagoras Lodge that Brother Brent mentioned, started that experiment of being a small TO lodge that didn't really need a real lodge setting to meet in, and saw how powerful and stronger it was with having 100% of their membership almost there every time they were meeting, and taking special trips together with the families or outings and charitable events. Whatever they did, it was always as a group and together. So they saw the validity in that, because a lot of those members are Grand Lodge officers, and slowly introduced this idea of, it's okay, we'll help you. These are the simple rules that you need to follow. And last year, I think it was like 13 new charters for small lodges that open in the state. And that now it's just a matter of how sustainable and are they going to be able to work and stick together, see how long that works. But they're implementing these observant practices without really scaring everybody and saying, this is traditional observance, this is how it's working. So I think Masons have always had a way of being covert about how they execute things. And it's easier to say, we're going to have the brother outside that's going to get his first degree reflecting for a minute, instead of saying, we're going to throw him in a chamber of reflection that's going to be dark with a candle and a skull, and write his will and testament. When you throw that to a lodge that's been around for 50, 100 years, and they've never done a chamber of reflection, what do you think they're going to say? And I think a lot of the Masons that want to try new things just try and move too fast into those things and not really take consensus of the parameters and how to slowly introduce this aspect that eventually will become the ritual of your lodge. It'll become the common practice of the lodge. So I think those smaller lodges are going to be the key to stabilize the membership if they're done right. But then I was threw out a question like, are we going to be prepared? Are we prepared for an influx of candidates when they come through our door? It seems historically that we're not. World War I, World War II, after 9/11, maybe after COVID, we are going to have more men that were interested in me. I've had candidates that visited our lodge saying, as soon as this is over, I want to come back to the lodge. I'm like, okay. So again, going back to that question and hitting on what Alex kind of brought up as well, are we going to be ready to guard the West Gate and allow this influx of men in, or are we just going to let them barrel through and create higher numbers again to lose them all over? The post-pandemic class of Masons, if you will. I think that's going to be an interesting thing to think about and prepare our lodges for, so we don't get too candidate happy and quantity happy in the next year or so.
We have talked about the candidates, and a past Grand Master here in North Carolina once said, I'm not going to say his name because I don't want him to start getting threats, but he said something that's probably unpopular with a lot of dues card carrying Masons. And he said more damage has been done by white balls than by black cubes, referring to the voting process. That we're just admitting anyone that shows up on our doorstep with a check in hand, like, here's my petition, here's my fees, let me in, and we're keeping our prices and everything artificially low. Brother Joe Martinez wanted to jump into that conversation as well. So Joe, take it away.
Yeah, I did, and then sorry, Brent, I saw you had your hand raised. But you're Canadian, so you're really polite and stuff, so you'll let me talk. But no, I just wanted to chime in a couple of things, and Dago dovetailed into them nicely. I've been watching the Facebook chat while we've been talking, and I'm seeing a lot of folks that are watching replying to us saying that, TO is not the only way. Well, I know we brought up the term traditional observance numerous times. I don't think any one of us said traditional observance is the only way to go, otherwise we're going to die. So I just want to clarify that statement. Are there concepts that are now under the traditional observance umbrella that are absolutely worthwhile? They absolutely are. Things like smaller lodges and things like that. You got to remember when, I'm also a member of the UGLE. I'm a member of Internet Lodge number 9659. There's not 9,659 lodges in the United Grand Lodge of England, okay? But what they do in a very intelligent way is when they get most lodges there, when they get to a size of about 30 or 40 members, they break off and start a new lodge. Do they all survive 300 years? No. But you have that core group of people that move on and do something else and brand their own identity into their lodges. Things that, at least here in the United States, are completely anathema to us. We'll keep lodges surviving with, 3 or 4 members showing up because nobody wants to turn in a charter. They think it's bad form. And I know Alex talks about this all the time, but it's a mindset thing. So if those mindset things fall under that umbrella of observant Masonry, that's just who its biggest proponents and loudest supporters have been. But again, I don't think TO is for everyone. It's not for every Mason. And but do they have some great ideas that I think should be implemented across the board? Absolutely. And you should see that. And again, so I just wanted to clarify our collective statements on TO for the Facebook chat.
I love that. And Brother Kevin.
Yeah, I was just gonna, jump in onto the members numbers, and I'm not. This is going to come across as I'm slagging Grand Lodges. I'm not trying to do that. I think part of the issue is a bit of the pomp and circumstance of being a Grand Lodge officer. We've gotten so used to what the duties of being a Grand Master and a Grand Lodge officer are, right? And you become Grand Master and you travel across the state for an entire year. And I guess my question is that important? Is that truly important to Freemasonry? And I think, maybe on one account it is, being able to see how healthy your lodges are across your grand jurisdiction. But, we have Zoom now for that. And, that's maybe oversimplifying it, but I've gotten to the, have our Grand Lodges gotten too bloated in terms of bureaucracy and what it means to be a Grand Lodge, a Grand Officer, and is that reflected in why things are kind of going this way? I don't know. Maybe that's part of it.
Okay, I'm going to chime in. So first of all, I'm going to say something. I've had the opportunity to attend Pythagoras Lodge with Mark from the time that it was incepted to the time that I left Canada. And what Mark has said is very true. Small membership, but a huge number of visitors, and it's an experience. I think that's something that we need to focus on. Whether or not you want to talk about traditional observation or you want to talk about not going down that route because the lodge may not be prepared for it. It still needs to be an experience. And I think the best piece of advice that I ever got when I became junior warden in my lodge was, if you want to have a successful lodge, every meeting a brother needs to leave with 3 things. 1, he needs to leave with a full belly from a good meal. 2, he needs to leave with a full heart from good fellowship. And 3, he needs to leave with a full head from good education. Now, a lodge doesn't have to be a TO lodge to do that, but it has to give that experience to somebody. They need to make it special to come out. And I'll relate a personal experience. I travel a lot, and I get to visit lodges all over Canada, the United States, and the world because of what I do. Before I moved to the States, I'd see a lot of comments on Facebook pages about Masons who are like, not enjoying their lodge experience. And I couldn't comprehend that until I got to visit a lodge. And I'll just say it was a lodge I visited in Wisconsin, where I had flown down to see my fiance at the time. And, went to go visit the local lodge, showed up at, 6:30 to 7:30 for dinner, walked into the lodge at 7:30 and walked out at 8 o'clock. 30 minutes. That was opening the lodge, closing the lodge, me talking about the difference between lodges in Canada and the US for 10 minutes. Okay? It's the first time in my life that I ever sat there and part of my language went, what the fuck? Why did I pack a tux? Why did I pack a tux? Why did I pack my apron? Why did I take the night off from visiting with my fiance to go to this lodge? It was like, it wasn't even worth it. Right? And I had never experienced that before. So when you give a man a special experience, and that starts from everything from like saying, hey, you know what? Don't come to lodge in your Crocs, your golf shorts, and your golf shirt. Put on a suit, wear a tie, dress up. Think about this as being something special. When you create that special experience, then it makes you want to crave it more. And another thing that's talking in here, I'm going to tie into this, is when we start talking about, Dago talked about, are we prepared to handle the numbers? The question to ask is, are we prepared to change on how we handle our numbers? We talked about this. New guy shows up, check in hand, petition in hand. Here you go. 3 months later, he's a master mason. No. I have a colleague in Europe who applied to a lodge in Switzerland. Okay. For 2 years, he didn't hear anything from them. Okay. Nothing. He sent them an email, said, I'm interested. Absolutely nothing. I was visiting one of the lodges in Switzerland and said, hey, how's this work? My guy's like, oh yeah, give them about another 6 to 8 weeks and we'll be in touch with them. They're very strict. 24 months, they'll send you an email to see whether or not you're still interested. Then they'll start the process of talking to you, right? Then they might start bringing you into a lodge. It's this whole thing about, are you really interested? Do you really want it? I know my mother lodge, we talk about a year. You knock on our door, say, hey, I'm interested. You come visit us, you come out to our festive boards, you join us for dinner, you join us for our events, you bring the wife and kids out, we get to know you, you get to know us. 12 months later, we'll hand you a petition, right? We want to make sure you're a fit for us and we're a fit for you. It's like dating. You need to match. And we've had people that through that process, we said, hey, you know what? We might not be the lodge for you, right? And that's something that you have to be prepared to do. So to go to this whole thing about, we got guys who, let's say, post-COVID here are, banging on the door to join lodges. Are we prepared to say, great, come out and have coffee with us, spend the next year getting to know us? Or is it going to be that rush to get them through the doors? And more importantly, is it going to be the rush to 3 months later have them be a master mason? Right? Like, it's an initiatic experience. You need to go through that experience.
Very well said. That's so true. It's all about the experience that you create and the attention to details that you give that experience that leaves a memorable impression on anybody that's visiting your lodge. And I think what we also encourage visitors to do is visit other lodges to make certain that this is the lodge of their choice. With the several lodges that surround our area, we say, look, they're like high schools. One's got a good football team, another one's got a good cheerleading team, another one's got a great debate team. If you're a debater, why do you want to join the cheerleading lodge? Like, you really want to make that connection because we want you to be, it's a lifelong match it's like a marriage, like you said. And it's so true. But you got to know how to control it from the get-go or else it derails itself.
All I keep thinking Brent, when you, and you're dead on when you made your points. I mean, I said this on Facebook jokingly, but the more I think about it, the more serious it is. I mean, I think we went from our slogan of "Let's take good men and make them better" to "Let's take anyone and just hope they aren't a shitbag," you know, and get that dues payment in. It's sad but true. You know, it goes back to that elitist thing. I think, yeah, we are, you know, if you're able to be in an organization where there are people that you intimately trust with your life and the lives of your family, yes, you can be elitist. You know, you know, and I say this to people all the time that want to join. I don't go to lodge to escape my wife and my kids. You know, I go to lodge to be changed and to have a profound experience. And if I'm not getting that, I don't go there. And, you know, Adam will attest to this. You know, I wasn't getting what I was looking for in a lodge that I was going to. So I went all the way to Washington, D.C. on a good brother's recommendation. And I started going to a lodge that Adam was a member of. And from the minute I walked in the door, I was like, holy shit, this is the experience that I've been looking for. And I was already a Mason, and I dropped my petition, and it took 10 months for them to actually get around to voting me in and making me a member, because they wanted to make sure that, you know, as excited as I was to join, that, you know, that I was going to be equally a good fit for them as they were for me. And I respected that. I didn't look at it as a bad thing or a negative. But, you know, that's not the majority opinion, you know, sad to say.
Yeah, like Brent said, we look at it like not dating, but I always say adoption. So it's like, you know, when I'm going to do candidate interviews and I'm going to, you know, find out about them and ask, you know, the questions that I need to ask, but then just get conversational. You know, one of the things I gotta be PC because I know this is open to everyone, but you know, I had one candidate say to me, you know, why is your lodge making me wait so long? You know, I've had other lodges that, you know, would have had me come in, you know, months ago, and I already would have had my Master Mason degree. And I said, well, I know you're on the dating sites. You know, when you meet a girl that you know, invites you to her house for a date, is that going to be the girl you marry, or is that going to be? And so what we're looking at is something long term. We're not, you know, I don't want to bring you into my lodge for a one night stand. I want you to come in and I want you to be involved and be, you know, excited and you know, to become a steward and you know, excited to fulfill those duties, not, you know, these lodges that, you know, have the, you know, revolving door at the west gate, and they, you know, promise them everything. You come in, we'll make you a Master Mason, you'll be master of the lodge, and our lodge has X amount of dollars. We're doing great, and we got our own building. And you look at the retention in those lodges, sure, you bring a couple of guys in, but, you know, when you cheapen it, you know, like McDonald's, you know, you got a 59-cent hamburger, you get what you pay for. You got a 59-cent hamburger, you're gonna have diabetes, you live on those things, right? And so it's, do you want a 59-cent candidate? So Joe's right. And I'll tell you what, when I came to DC, and I used to visit this lodge that I ended up joining. And when I came to DC full time, a buddy and a pastor grand said, you know, Adam, you've already been through chairs, and there was a lodge right next to your house that really is struggling, and so if you wouldn't mind, you know, getting in line there. So I did, and I went through the line. But when I was done, I went, you know, right back to the lodge that Joe and I are talking about, because it's you know, it you know, like Mark is talking about. So my mother lodge is in California, and it's a veterans lodge, and so it is as close as Mark's saying. It's like it's a bunch of you know, Marines and me, like an Army guy. Like the one Army guy, there was like another 99-year-old Army guy that they stuck me with as my mentor because they didn't know who else to stick me with, and it's that close. Everyone shows up. There wasn't a choice. Like you if it was, you know, officers to practice degrees, everyone was there on time, excited on, you know, degree day. But I'll tell you, when I went to, I lived in England for grad school. When I went there, and got involved. It's exactly the way you described, Mark. It was like, people, took it so seriously, couldn't wait, especially in some of these smaller towns out in the countryside.
Mhm.
Sure. And people say elite, not elite because of like blue bloods or anything. We're talking like these are like salt of the earth farmers and plumbers and stuff. Elite in that they wouldn't just take any Tom, Dick, or Harry off the street. It's like you had to come and show commitment, and it meant a lot that these guys would, wear their Sunday finest, and we have martinis together, and have singing and silliness before. But I'll tell you what, I like Joe. I have a lodge at the Grand Lodge of England, my family lodge, called Port Soaken 5088, and we would all meet like early afternoon across from the Grand Lodge at Freemason Arms or Hercules Pillars and have drinks, but you always knew that when you walked into the lodge, you had to be spot on your ritual. Everyone took it that seriously. So it was, it wasn't the dumb thing, as they say, is to be a gentleman. And so they are, the guys that they end up letting, the guys they end up letting through the West Gate. I mean, it's not going to be for, a year or 2 years in order, for them to, join a line or join a Grand Lodge. It's, really, it's an adoption, and it's going to be something lifelong.
So let's go back to something. We talked about the, as worshipful brother Brent so apropos, appropriately referred to it, an initiatic experience. And it should be an initiatic experience. And so if we each look back at why we joined Masonry, why we petitioned to join the lodge, what were our reasons? It was not to, I would say in most of our cases, it was not with the intention of being thrown into the officer chairs or being master of the lodge or any of that. We joined for a more profound, deeper, personal reason. And I think we are robbing our candidates of that in a lot of ways. I personally, just speaking for myself personally, I feel like I was robbed of that initiatic experience because I was rushed through the catechisms, and I was told that, my goal in Masonry should be to be an officer in the lodge, to one day be the master of the lodge. That was what was pushed on me. And I had to learn a lot of these things on my own, and it took years to really fully appreciate that. And I have since found the initiatic experience I was looking for, but going through it, through the degrees, I was robbed of that. And so I'd love to hear your inputs on, your thoughts on what was your initiatic experience like? What were you looking for when you joined the craft? It had to be more than just a charity.
Well, I know from my experience, I had a horrible experience. All 3 degrees were terrible. The work was terrible. It was done very poorly. I questioned why the hell I was there, but I studied. I had interest in Freemasonry, and thankfully I got together with other like-minded brethren, and I saved my Masonic life because I found other brothers who are on the same path I was on, but my experience was terrible. And it happens that they don't have any, the ritual, the experience is bad. And, why will you come back? You just don't get any experience for it because the work, there's no pride in the work. What happens? So it comes to a point I was saying, what the other brethren was saying earlier, how many lodges in your districts are on life support, where the oxygen's running out, where they won't change the culture of the lodge? The young members join and they try and change the culture. They try and raise the bar of the lodge. You can't do it. How many times have you gone to a lodge as I do a lot of education, you go in and you're doing a historic presentation. In the front row, there's 4 or 5 young Masons with passion in their eyes. You've got the naughty dogs on the back row falling asleep. You've got the other brethren watching the watchers. Time to go now, looking, are we going to go downstairs to have some soggy sandwiches? After the presentation, I go to these 4 or 5 brethren. I say, brethren, you've got to go and visit other lodges. Sometimes lodges have to die with dignity. So the young and open new lodges, young brethren have to leave these old lodges, get 7 or more young brethren, and open a young, dynamic lodge. That's the future. Let these lodges die with dignity, hand in the charter. If they want, these brethren, older brethren want to join another lodge, fine. But that's the future of Freemasonry. Sometimes in the forest, the old trees have to die so the young saplings can see the light. So this is, to me, is very passionate because I see it all over. These lodges with grand lodges keep these lodges alive. Let them die and open new lodges and small lodges. That's the future, brother.
Well, I mean, you're just a comment, worshipful Mark. You're lucky. In my jurisdiction, in my mother jurisdiction, you need 25 people to open a new lodge. So to get 25 guys to agree on anything just probably isn't happening anytime soon. But yeah, no, I completely agree with you. But just to answer Matt's question, my initiation was okay. There were some elements of it that were good, depending on who was doing the degree. But it's what happened right after I became a master mason. And I did the traditional thing, I learned my catechisms. My catechism instructor actually had a really bad stutter. So God bless him. It took a really long time for me to learn the catechisms because he stuttered a lot. But I got them done. And once I became a master mason, I went to my very first lodge meeting and I was super excited. I learned how to tie a tie because I was in the Army, so I had a clip on. And I walked out of that first meeting of, reading a couple of letters and paid some bills, and we gave some money to a charity, and that was it. And we were done by 8:15. I looked around and I'm like, what the hell is this? They're like, oh, it's a stated meeting. I'm like, well, what else do we do? But we have dinner and we come upstairs and we do business. I'm like, that's business? Like, that's a complete waste of time. So I actually suffered through that for about a good 4 or 5 months. And I decided I didn't want to play anymore. And I actually didn't do anything Masonic for a good couple of years. So when people always, that I meet, when I talk about this to them, I always tell them I'm a born again Mason because I did leave the craft for, a good 2-3 years. I paid dues. I just didn't show up. But it wasn't until I found my lodge here in Virginia where I actually found something that gave me purpose and gave me the desire to want to be there. And we still read minutes and still pay bills, but we try to inject something, to Ben's point, that's more profound, that does keep me motivated. But I walked a lot of people are surprised when I tell them I've been a Mason for 15 years, but for 2 or 3 of those years, I hated it, and I hated the idea of it because I didn't know anything different. And then just because Adam's staring at me, when I found his lodge in DC, I was blown away. I'm like, this is exactly what I've been looking for, and it's taking me 13 years to find it. So that's why I say, I'm always a born again Mason, and those are the reasons why.
So Joe, you bring up a good point, and I want to throw this out there. Are there things that we are doing currently to really shoot ourselves in the foot? I mean, we've talked about, depriving Masons or candidates of the initiatic experience. Several of the other things, there are other elements that are involved. There's this stigma of racism or this exclusivity that if you are not a white Christian male, you can't be a member of this fraternity, or I don't want to sit in the lodge with you. And those are old stereotypes of Masonry and some other fraternal orders as well, that we're working very hard to dispel because that's far from the truth. But unfortunately, there are pockets of Masonry where that really does hold true. And so I'm just wondering, are we really addressing those issues, and are those issues really hurting us?
So Matt, before I comment on that one, I just want to back up to that piece that you were talking about before with the experience, and then I'll comment on that. Just because, you know, based on what we had this conversation, my experience was very, very different from what we've talked about. So from the time that I, you know, showed interest in my lodge to the time that I was brought in, it was about 7 months because we weren't really busy at that point. But from the time of me becoming an entered apprentice to my Master Mason degree was a full year, right? Simply because it's the way that our process works. But to go to it, I was initiated on a night that we call Past Masters Night. So all past masters are the ones who took the chairs. Now, fortunately, my mother lodge is known as a ritual lodge, and they do very good ritual. So not knowing what ritual is supposed to look like, but remembering what I experienced and knowing what I've put on, they did an incredible job on making it that experience. We also keep it small. Under a Grand Lodge, we can do 5 candidates at a time. We don't. We never do more than 2. And we've had times where we've done 3, but that's very rare, and that's only on our first degree. By the time you get to the 3rd degree, we prefer to do 1. So we really focus on that experience. So that's what it was for me. That night that I came into the lodge, the entire lodge was there to bring me into the lodge, to bring me into the fold. They made me feel like the most important person in the world by going through that. The same thing with all the coaching between my degrees, the same thing with my education, the same thing with everybody being there for every degree to put it on to help me become better. And that's the experience that I got. And my lodge experience has been very different. I'm used to showing up at my lodge at 5:30 to 6 o'clock in the afternoon. We have cocktails until, you know, dinner time, have dinner. Then we go into lodge at 7:30. We don't finish in lodge till 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And that's on a business meeting. It's not because we're doing business, it's because we have our education, right? We've always done it that we have one state of communication, and then we have an emergent meeting. We only do degree work on emergent meeting. We would never do it as part of a regular lodge night. We make the degrees special. So I had an incredible experience coming into Masonry. And I'll be very honest, I got spoiled completely, because to me, that's what Masonry was, is, and will always be. And then I've had the chance to travel and be in other jurisdictions, like I said, where I've walked out of a lodge wondering why I went there. And it's kind of like, yeah, I'm very lucky. But I think it's kind of one of those things that it's like, knowing that that can be done really makes it a case of wanting to make sure that that's the experience that others have. Now, going to what you talked about, there is a balance between, and I'll use the term being elitist and being, I'll call it separatist. When we talk about something being elite, we talk about being special, right? And that's what we want Masonry to be. We want to be elite. We want to be special. But to your point, we do want to make sure that it is inclusive. And yeah, there are parts of the world where there are pockets where if you are not white Christian male with a European background, it's kind of like, why are you applying to this lodge? And it's kind of one of those things that's going to be something that happens until the culture outside of Masonry and the culture around it changes. Like, you know, I'll put it this way. I come from a lodge where it's common for us to have multiple volumes of the sacred law on the altar. It's not the Bible. Our code doesn't even call it the Bible. It's referred to as the VSL in our ritual. Okay, it is the volume of the sacred law. We will have the Quran, we'll have the Torah, we'll have the Tanakh, we will have the Bible, we have the Bhagavad Gita on there. We have what is representative of our members, right? And when you take an obligation, you take the obligation on the book of your faith, right? So that is part of it. I'll say this, I have been a Mason in other jurisdictions where I've had people in my jurisdiction that I'm in now who have made it very clear. I'll put it this way, I'm Muslim. I've had somebody sit there on Facebook and say, in a lodge that's an hour and a half away from where I am, that they would never sit in lodge with a Muslim because the only reason why he'd be there is to kill everybody in lodge, right? You know, so it's kind of like, do these pockets exist? Yeah. Do some of those people need to find an exit? You bet. Does somebody in their lodge need to tell them, you know what? Take a look at some of the principles of Masonry and evaluate things in your own heart, or you know what? There's a door, right? Does it exist? You bet. Is it something that needs to be changed? You bet. Is that going to have to be forced by other members? You bet.
Yeah, Brent, in fact, you actually used to live 2 doors down from one of those Masons.
Yep.
Right? And
Yep.
knowing that, you're friends with him on social media, you knowing that he lives 2 doors down from you, knowing he's a brother, and he still posts these very offensive anti-Islamic memes and posts on Facebook, and then his very next post is squaring compasses and love everybody, and it was very contradictory and frankly embarrassing to Masonry, because it really shed a very negative light on who we are. And I think more especially you being a neighbor just 2 doors down from him. And I know you saw those things on there, being friends with him on social media. And that's not what Masonry is. And it's sad that there are, I'm not going to call them Masons. I'm going to call them dues payers. It's sad that there are dues payers who, who do that, and they shed a very negative light on who we are as Masons, because that is not indicative of Masonry at all. I want to hear from Brother Alex. You had mentioned something over in our chat here, going over to the side, but Alex, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I'd love to. So if you don't mind, I'll touch on both of those as well. So for my experience, I think my mother lodge, I've transferred since then, but I think they did better than most. I'll put it that way. But at the same time, I felt like it was excellent because I was lucky enough to come in under the mentorship of my father-in-law. So yeah, I've got 5 generations of Masons in my family, knew nothing about it, really didn't care to know anything about it. Just, it wasn't in my sights. When I'd go and see the gravestones, my parents would be like, oh, it's some kind of cult, and just left it at that. Got with my wife and my father-in-law, just, Masonry, just nonstop, and wanted me to join. And, it wasn't pushy on join, but just wanted to get in my sights. And I was just like, nah, I don't know. It doesn't look appealing. And I just blew it off. And it's like one of those things, right? Like once you hear about it and you blow it off, then you start seeing it everywhere. It's like you get a new car and everyone else has that car all of a sudden. I started seeing Masonry on TV. I started hearing about it. I saw a guy walk through Price Chopper in full regalia. Like, when does that happen? And just all of a sudden, it was so on my mind. I went back to him. I was like, hey, tell me about this. And he blew me off. He's like, some other time. And so he's from Ecuador. And I didn't know that, in their tradition, at that point, when they knew you were serious, they traditionally blow you off 3 times to make sure you were devoted and serious about it before they really let you in. I kind of wormed my way after getting blown off twice. I just told him, I'm going to a different lodge. And then he's like, whoa, hold on. I'll help you out. Come here with me. Go to the right lodge. So he told me straight up from the beginning, not all these guys do it the right way. And he goes, you can join Masonry and be unhappy, or you can join Masonry with me and I'll show you the right way. I was like, show me the right way. So I've always been that oddball in lodge. The lodge that I've transferred to now is kind of a rural city lodge. When I went there, it was mostly jeans and t-shirts, and I was, full suit, bow tie. I've always been that oddball. But for me, that feels right because that's what I was brought up on. And my father-in-law would turn over in his grave if he saw me in any less. So that's just what I do. That's what feels appropriate to me. And that's how I continue it. I think that process is super important. I think what you're touching on in the chat there is I mentioned that, as some of you have brought up about going through your degrees and then it being followed by business, that kills me. It should be special for the candidate. It should be about you. It shouldn't be about 5 guys at the same time. And as I said, I felt lucky in mine. It was done better than most. Was it perfect? No, but it was good. It was very good. And I went through traditionally. I went through and I proved up on every degree and moved on to the next, to the point that when I got my 3rd degree, I proved up. And that's not required here. I didn't know that, but my father-in-law told me, you're proving up tonight. So I did it. And that night it threw me off because every other time I'd proven up, I got a round of applause. When I proved up on my Master Mason degree, it was silence. And then I hear some guy in the back, well, he didn't need to do it anyways. Doesn't matter. I was like, wait, what? But then, later on, I'm like, I'm glad I did. It means something to me. So I think that's very important. It needs to be special. It needs to be made special. No business, not five guys. I got a touch of that going through the Scottish Rite, not to, bash any orders or anything, but my Scottish Rite was one day. I think now they break it up over a weekend or possibly 2 weekends. When I went through, it was one day. It was cool, but I remembered like 3 words of it. It was like a dump truck of water over my head. It meant nothing to me. And, I don't know. It's just not there. To the aspect of racism in the craft, it's unfortunately in small places you do find it. We had some in my lodge, which really, really threw me off. And it was from like the sweetest guy you would ever meet, oddly enough. So my father-in-law joined our lodge right after I did. We kind of transferred out together. He's Ecuadorian. And one of the guys, not going to say names, he's no longer a Mason. He invited me over for dinner, and we're having a fire pit in his driveway. And he just oddly brings up, he's like, has your father-in-law ever had trouble in Masonry? It's like, no, not to my knowledge. He's huge into it. Like, it's his life. He's like, oh, well, I don't mind so much that he joined, but if we ever had a Muslim walk through the doors, that would be the last day for me. And it caught me like silence, and I just kind of looked and I said, well, that's really unfortunate. I think you kind of missed the point of Masonry. And it was really awkward into the dinner. Obviously it didn't last too much longer than that. He kind of brought things to an end, but within a month, he made up a weird excuse about something else and demitted just out of the blue. So it's weird. It sucks. It is out there. So I feel for anyone that's experienced that. Luckily, that never came to my father-in-law's foresight, but it's hard. And for anyone out there that feels that way, I would question you at the same thing. Really look at your oaths and what Masonry is at its core, because I think you skipped some steps and you need to look over it again.
I think you just reminded me of a little bit of my experience, Alex, and talking about your father-in-law. And Kevin's probably going to start laughing because the guys actually joke about this all the time with me. So I'm in a rural / suburban area of where I live. And one of my lodges is very vanilla, no pun intended, in its demographic. So, and I thought this was a joke one time. So, I affiliated with that lodge and I became a member and became an officer, and was talking to somebody out in the dining hall, and my family would come to our dinners for our stated. So everybody knows my wife and my kids, and, they tolerate my 3 crazy children running around. But this time we brought my mom, because she was staying with us. And, so stated night is family dinner night. We bring the whole family and we all have dinner together and stuff. And one of the older Masons asked me, he's like, hey, that's your mom? I was like, yeah, it's my mom. He's like, where's she from? I'm like, Chile. Because, my mom is like FOB, still speaks English with a broken accent and stuff, so it's very obvious where she's from. And he's like, oh, and he's just staring at me and looking at me, and he's like, oh, I thought you guys were Italian or something. I'm like, well, did that make any damn difference or something, where I'm from? And he's like, no, I didn't know. And he walks away, and I was like, okay. I'm like, I wonder how many other guys thought I was Italian the night that they voted me in, because I guess that made a difference. But yeah, I just found that interesting, and kept that in my back pocket, but it is there.
Right. Alex, I want to say this, there's something that you said, and I agree with you. You are an oddball. But
Thank you.
The truth is, I think every one of us on this panel are oddballs. In a sense, there's going to be a lot of Masons or dues card carriers that are going to watch this presentation and vehemently disagree with this, and we're probably going to get hate mail for this, or threats. It's fine. I'm used to that by now, but it really does speak to the heart of what we are looking at Masonry. And worshipful brother Mark pointed this out a little earlier, lodges really do have a lifespan. We don't have that many lodges that, I mean, we have some that you can point at and say, oh, this lodge is 100 years old. This lodge is 200 years old. But that's not the norm for lodges. There is a life cycle to lodges. And really, it's, 30 to 50 years for the average lodge, and that's it. That lodge dies out, but then another lodge is formed, and it's a constant evolution of lodges. So I'd like to hear some input on that, or if anybody has any opinions on that.
Well, lodges definitely have a lifespan. A lodge may be 200 years old, and I deal with some lodges who are 200 years old in my business. And but are they the 200 years old? But that's just their the 200 years. But they're still a dying lodge, and they're just hanging on by a shoestring. They're living by the traditions that they had. Or we're 200 years old, but they haven't changed. They're dying, and some of them are actually, pretty pathetic, really. In the fact that what they're doing inside lodge is not, to me, Freemasonry. They're dying lodges, but they're 200 years old.
The charter's 200 years old, but
Yeah,
a lot of them have already died, and they've been like Lazarus, risen from the dead, right? Because there will be a time when a charter will be brought back to life from a lodge that has been long defunct, and so, or there's been mergers. But the bottom line is, it's not going to be a historical line of populated by particular families or anything like that. It's going to be just like anything else. Like, I mean, we're talking about these lodges. The lodges are just microcosms of the geographic areas in which they reside. So, I mean, if this is a, homogenous area, semi-racist, then it's the lodge would end up being the same way, just the same way the church would be the same way. And people to work at the Giant or whatever they call markets out here the same way, right? It's all, I mean, it's not like, there's like an X-ray scanner that Masonry has that we can, figure out, which are going to be the, unique people within an area that's predominantly, one race or, mentality, and we're going to find the one open-minded, person. But, you say that, Masonry changes over time, but yeah, I don't know. I just, the charters are that old, but I'll just say maybe like one thing that I was thinking about in all this conversation, I've witnessed because I've done a couple demographic analyses. One I did for the Scottish Rite, the Supreme Council once. I did one for TC Grand Lodge. And so I'd say one thing that we're not talking about, which is interesting, is also the effects of, for example, when I did an analysis of Scottish Rite and a couple other Grand Lodges, one thing I noticed is, I forget who was saying it earlier, but we're bleeding off some members, obviously, especially during COVID. And it's not across the board. Like, the old guys are going to continue, paying dues more than likely until they pass away. I mean, it's just, they've been doing that since time immemorial, right? So we look at particular demographics, say the 60 and older, but then you also have these, Grand Lodges that are, scouring, how can we get in more members, because we have like we had already talked about, a bureaucracy, and we got to keep feeding that. We need dues, right? And so how do we keep feeding that? And, one way we can go to the colleges and bring in, college kids, and so, and others. And so as you bring in a bunch of younger members, and you have a top-heavy population of older members, median ages in a lot of Grand Lodges in the 65 to 75 range. Now you have a bunch of guys that are in the 30 to 40 range. Well, you're missing everyone from 50 to 60, right? And so, and I've seen that in some of these analyses, is that when you have countries that are in that situation, a lot of times that can lead to conflict. And I'll give you an example. So if you look at if you looked at Ireland, in the mid 1900s, you had Masonry kind of flourishing, and you had this kind of two populations. You had the Protestants in the north, and you had the majority Catholic Ireland. But as one population grew, the Catholics, Protestants don't have nearly as many children as the Catholics did in Ireland, and as the North Ireland Catholics grew and grew and grew, it grew in proportion to the Protestants. It led to Freemasonry changing over there. So like we got what was called the Orange Order in North Ireland and Scotland, and we and I see Mark shaking his head, because if I wrote an article a long time ago about this, when I lived over there, called Masons Gone Wild. But it's amazing that what we're talking about underlying everything here is the slow but steady demographic shifts. And so the thing about we demographers is that we measure things in decades and centuries, and so they so anyway, I'll just say just something to keep in mind is just that one thing that we should all be keeping an eye on within our Grand Lodges is the different groups that have completely different ideologies, right? When you have these, maybe younger members, and they're far more liberal than, some of the people that we're hearing about right now, some of these older entrenched that come from, maybe the baby boom generation. If we don't have these people that were somewhere in the middle, the Gen Xers, right, to bridge that gap, and then it can lead to far more conflict, like I'm hearing about right now. And I've seen that certainly in Grand Lodges. And so anyway, I just wanted to add that bit of perspective.
I think that's great. And one thing, I'll throw in there is, I think, in my personal opinion, more lodges need to start considering consolidation or merging with other lodges. In some areas, we have too many lodges clustered together, and each of those lodges are struggling to even have enough members to open a lodge meeting, to even have a quorum. Whereas if they came together and merged, they would be fantastic lodges. Mm-hmm. So let's go around. We've been going for almost 2 hours now, so let's go around and get some final thoughts from everyone about tonight's discussion, or what are your feelings on lodge mergers, or what do you think the future of Masonry looks like? So Worship Brother Mark, let's start with you if you like.
It comes to mind when I was sitting in a lodge in India. I'm sitting with the past Grand Master of Northern India. I was in Shimla, up in the Himalayas. I said to the Grand Master, how many people there are in India? He said, about 1 billion people. How many Masons are there? He said, well, we're under 100,000. We're about 90,000. I said, well, that's not a very big number, really. He said, but we only want the best to join Freemasonry. And it's about quality, not quantity. That's why I was emphasizing earlier. And I think that's the only way for the future of us to go, is we have to, let's not keep thinking numbers. That's always, you hear, the numbers. Let's just start thinking about the quality. Quality. And guard that West Gate. And don't be frightened to say no. And that's the only thing I have to say is, basically, let's open some new lodges, new members. It's the young guys. It's not old guys like me. I'm 66. I'm the old guard. We need the young guys to start opening new lodges, and you're the future of Freemasonry. It's not my generation. It's your generation, generations under you who are the future, and you got to take the bull by the horns and move forward. So that's all I can say.
All right, worshipful brother Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. If I know how all these guys feel, I know most of these guys before tonight, and I feel like they do. We're all like-minded about what is the good stuff in Masonry. But for the people that may be listening, I want to leave them with this thought. If you're unhappy with your Masonic experience, you have it within your power to change it. Either go find people that think like we do. There are lodges like this. Now, you may have to travel for it. You may have to drive an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 or however many to get to it. But if your lodge experience is sucking, go someplace that doesn't suck. Go find a place that does this, and it will fill your spirit, and you will fall back in love with Masonry. And and the only other thing you can do other than go find your tribe is to change things in your lodge. When you find your tribe, you'll go back to your home lodge if you don't quit it and want to change it. So slowly and methodically, and within the rules of your Grand Lodge, and without angering the other men in your lodge, slowly start to make those changes. But go find your tribe, and you'll have a better experience in Masonry. That's all I got, Matt.
And again, I'm muted. I apologize. Brother Joe.
Yes, I was also muted. This is awesome. This is, this discourse alone was, to me, one of the signs of good Masonry. When good guys come together and can discuss things. I wish it stretched forth to all the other parts of the craft. But I mean, for me, my takeaways are, not to repeat what everybody else has said, but Masonry, I'm sorry, Facebook, I'm going to piss some of you off. Masonry is not a social club, okay? Not a social club, okay? Go join something else if that's what you're looking for. If you want to have a social experience with people that you can truly look them in the eye and tell them that you love them because you all have this connected, bonded, profound experience of going through an initiatory process together and can share that, that's what it's for. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm still here, because I look for that every single time I go to lodge. And so get rid of green beans. We're not a social club. And just keep fighting the good fight, like Ben said. And yeah, this was great. Thank you for putting this together, Matt.
Thank you, Joe. And if anyone has a takeaway from tonight, it's what Joe just said. Get rid of green beans. That will solve all of our problems. Worship Brother Dago.
Green beans. Let's reinvent the green beans. Yeah, I think that it's definitely the success of Masonry is going to be in the smaller, more concise groups. But I also feel it's the officers, the lodge masters, after you become the master of the lodge, sticking to your lodge and helping support the incoming line and have a 5-year plan laid out, or even a 10-year if you can, but definitely communicate. That's a big thing. Communicate with the rest of your officers on what you want that lodge experience to be like at the lodge on all levels, so it's consistent. And it's consistent to every member that comes in, so it continues to grow and become a traditional thing. So we have to become the mentors to help the lodge grow, but also not be the naysayers and be open-minded to what the new generations of Masons coming into the lodges are looking for and are interested in, to help implement that into the lodge, because they're the ones that are going to be running the lodge many years later. And if you're not helping them grow and evolve, then they're just going to leave. They're going to go find another lodge, or they're just going to stop Masonry altogether. So I think it's the responsibility of every member at that lodge, not just the officers, to really understand its culture and help sustain it and cultivate it, so it could become the brand, if you will. We talk about branding, the brand that your lodge is there to offer. And I agree with everything else everybody was saying. So thank you, Matt, for inviting me into this group. It was a worthwhile discussion, and I think we need to have more of it, obviously, for sure.
Brother Dago, thank you for being a part of this panel. This has been fantastic. Let's go to Brother Adam.
Well, to echo what Ben was saying, here we're, preaching to the choir, because one of the silver linings of COVID is it's really, within Masonry, I always say, Masons, at least the Masons that I enjoy spending my time with, the way Joe explained to us with the Aristotelian thing, I think we were intimate or whatever. The guys that I like to hang out with during this COVID, we've come together and have been doing these presentations and doing the stuff that I enjoy in Masonry, which is, looking at the deep meanings of the degrees and the alchemy and the astrology and the Kabbalah hidden within them. And so if we're already like a lunatic fringe within society to become Masons, and within Masonry, it seems like to be Masons that actually get it, in my opinion, it's we're the lunatic fringe within Masonry, and it shouldn't be that way. When I came up in Masonry in California, it was a we would meet guys that liked alchemy, Kabbalah, and astrology, and we felt clandestine because we were we looking at deep meanings, and that wasn't what a lot of lodges did. So as far as takeaways, just echo what everyone here says. Let lodges die. It's not humane to leave them on life support for decades. Consolidate some lodges. Don't just make lodges because you need 4 new votes in some particular camp or something. It's just, and and I think, I like what Brent said about each lodge meeting, those types of things, full bellies, full minds, and essentially body, mind, spirit. And you do those things and love, and maintain the golden rule and love your brothers, yourself type of stuff. And, it'll be a beautiful craft once again.
Wonderful. Worshipful Brother Brent.
There's that old joke about how many Masons does it take to change a light bulb? Whoa, we don't like change, right? That's, everybody says that, these numbers are declining, or, the naysayers, everything like that. The reality is Masonry as we understand it right now in 2020 is not the same that Masonry was in 1960. It's not the same as it was in 1920. It's not the same as it was in 1880. It's definitely not the same as it was in 1717. It has changed. It has evolved in some ways. And like I said, we have to ask that question about, is it really right now going through a correction to fix a mistake? And I think that it's one of those things that if we look at the fact that Masonry has survived for 300 years, if we just kind of follow Grand Lodge theory type thing, that it will continue to do so, but it may not be the face that we are used to. It may not be the understanding of we have it right now. If we have this panel 20 years from now, we might be having a very different discussion about how, we need to start looking at, keeping these lodges capped at 10 because 20 is too big, We'll have to see how it goes. But the biggest thing is just realizing that, change doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad if something dies. It's like Brother Toon said, sometimes the old trees got to get cleared out so that the saplings can grow.
Well said. Great. Brother Kevin.
Let me unmute. No, I mean, I definitely agree with Brent. Masonry looks different now than it did in the past, and it's going to look vastly different in the future than it does now. And I think that future is going to be even smaller numbers than what we have now. As as Ben pointed out, we haven't seen the official numbers, but it is quite likely that we are below 1 million members in the United States. That's not a bad thing. To to get on the correction thing. And, you know, I think I am worried, but I am also buoyed by, you know, what's going on here at Refracted Light, and what's going on with, you know, the various Masonic cons, Esotericon, Masonicon, the California Masonicon. You know, there is a lot of excitement and good energy coming out of those events. So yeah, you know, the numbers are going to go down. They're going to continue to go down, but we have really good brethren out there who are doing some great things for the craft. And I think that's something to be excited about, and excited for the future of what and where those events are going to go in the future. I'm really excited for that.
Great. And Brother Alex, let me ask you, as a historian, a Masonic historian, are there things that we have experienced in our past that have haunted us today, as far as maybe the Morgan affair, things of, you know, the bubble that occurred after the World Wars, things of that nature that have had a residual impact on Masonry and where we are today?
Oh, 100%. And, you know, I think what you mentioned there are the two key aspects of the leaks, right? Like, especially after the Morgan affair happened, like I mentioned earlier, when we came back and it was trying to convince society that, you know, we weren't evil, we're here for you. The face that we presented of Masonry drastically changed. It was no more longer about us. It's all about you, and that's how we're going to survive. And that process is what really was a driving point after, you know, the wars, when we had all these people joining in, is because they were looking for civic organizations, and we were like, hey, that's us. We're what you want us to be. We're for everybody. And you know, that's not right, but that's what was put out there. And that's, if you look around, that's why we got so many people that really probably would be better fit for another organization, but they're trying to make Masonry that for them. And the common argument you hear today is Masonry is whatever you want it to be. No, unfortunately, it's not. You just want it to be that. And we've shifted a lot of our lodges and so to that direction. But you know, Masonry at the end of the day is something much bigger and beyond us. And as we see, it's going to correct itself. It's going to change. It's going to change the way it looks and acts, and we're going to see that moving forward. And with that in thought, you know, as what I see for Masonry in the future, I see that it's going to be much smaller. But like we've touched on today, quality over quantity. That's the real goal to go after here. Brother Mark touched on that perfectly. And, you know, we're seeing that drastically right here in Kansas. You know, we don't have the huge numbers that some jurisdictions have. So when you look at our losses, it's a lot more scary to me. You know, just over the last few years, if we look at 2016, we had just over 17,000 members, 17,304. 2017, we lost almost 1,000. We went down to 16,427. Right here, currently today, we're sitting at 13,851. I mean, that nosedive that we see in the stats is real life. It's right here. And we see that Masonry is changing its path. With that, you know, I don't think it's bad. As far as these small lodges, I think it's right. And, you know, I've made the half joke before. So many people approach the problem of Masonry is that we need to correct it by raising dues. You know, higher dues is going to bring quality members. I strongly disagree. I think, honestly, if I was allowed to, I could have a lodge with zero cost, zero. And I could have the best experience. How? I'm going to be selective on who the hell I let in. And you can do that at your lodge. You can do that by utilizing your investigation committee. They're there for a reason. It's not just to see if the guy likes football like you do. it's actually to dig in and see, first of all, is he right for Masonry? Second of all, is he right for Masonry, but also right for your particular lodge? And beyond that, one step deeper than that, don't sign the guy's petition if you don't know him. I don't know how many people I've seen, hey, I've got an interest. Oh, here's a signature. Here's a petition for you. No. Do a pre-investigation. If you've never met this guy before and he doesn't have anyone to vouch for him, take him out. Go have dinner with him. Go have a coffee with him. Get to know this guy before you vouch for him to come into the fraternity. Unless we vet that process, it's not gonna get any better in that sense. We're just going to continue bringing in the wrong people. You know, we touched on ego a while ago, and one of the things made me think of this, especially when you brought up hate mail. Me and my co-host Robert Marshall for Historical Light, we got the chance to stop in this small town, El Reno, Oklahoma, and we found this abandoned Masonic lodge, and we were lucky enough to get to do a tour throughout it. Blew my socks off. I mean, this lodge was amazing. In the upstairs hallway, there was an entire long hallway of nothing but preparation rooms. I mean, I think we counted at least 12 prep rooms. The only reason they would have that is for doing a mass amount of mass degrees. One day classes, I mean, this is fulfilling, you know, or not fulfilling, this is filling that with so many people that, I don't know. I mean, in a small town like that, I couldn't imagine they all were there for the right reasons. But as far as the hate mail, when we were going through there, I made the mistake because when we went into El Reno, I didn't see a single other living person besides myself and my wife and Robert. I called the place a ghost town probably 4 or 5 times on the live that we did. That live got shared to like every little Facebook group of that county, and it went like uber viral, and I got all this hate mail and death threats and all this stuff. El Reno's not a ghost town. If anyone's watching, I'm sorry. But with that, you know, it just shows what we've came from of really pushing just to get people in the door so that we can have dues coming in and pay the bills. And what I really think will be interesting to see as the numbers continue to dwindle and we're forced into these small lodge situations is when grand lodges kind of disperse away and we see less glitz and glamour behind being a Mason. Less shiny badges, less titles. Who's really going to want to be a part of it? Who's going to stick around when you don't get all that glitz and glamour behind your name? Who's really going to be there for Masonry? Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to prevail. As numbers dwindle and the size dwindles and it turns into what it's naturally wanting to be, Masonry will prevail. And if you're not there for that, then it's not for you. With that, this was an excellent discussion panel this evening. I'm just honored to be a part of it. So thank you so much for putting this together and inviting me on.
Well, where's your brother Adam, Alex, Adam, everyone? Thank you for being a part of it. What I'll say is, Alex, what you were saying is so very true. When we put together this panel, just for anyone watching, we did not get together ahead of time and discuss our opinions or thoughts. This is all fresh. This is all right off the cuff. And the truth of the matter is, I thought that a couple of the panelists here may argue for larger numbers, for wanting more members to come through the doors. But I think you see a unity here where there is a consensus that maybe we are admitting too many men into our organization. It wasn't really until the 19th century that we really started seeing the word fraternity associated with Masonry. George Washington, in fact, referred to it as the society. Others referred to it as the order. But I think, you know, when we tag the word fraternity onto there, we give it a specific label. And I think it's much more than a fraternity. A fraternity would refer to our dinners together, I'm sorry, Joe, green beans. But Yeah, he's shaking his head. But it's much, much more than a fraternity. It is, as Worshipful Brother Brent said, we are an initiatic order. And we are seeing ourselves, I hope, returning to that. And if that means smaller numbers, that's fine. But I don't think Masonry is in any danger whatsoever of disappearing. We are returning back to the fundamentals, the principles of what Masonry was. A society of men who were joined together to explore and to be tolerant of different ideas, religions, scientific beliefs, whatever the case may be. But it's about that expanding and learning. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to agree with everything. One of the fundamentals of Masonry is just having an open mind, being open to what others say or others' opinions, being open to other ideas, and then using your own reason and judgment to figure that out for yourself. So with that, I want to thank all of the panelists for being here tonight. I think this is a fantastic discussion. Honestly, I think we could have gone all night discussing this, and we've gone over 2 hours now, but it's absolutely been fantastic. I hope everyone has enjoyed it, and I look forward to the death threats and everything else I'm going to receive for this, but that's okay. But brothers, thank you so much for being here this evening. Everyone on Facebook, thank you for your comments, what you've added to the conversation. You have absolutely been invaluable. So thank you again, and tune in next week when we have the duel between the Grand Orders, Ben Wallace and Adam Goldman, fight to the death. You don't want to miss that. Thank you again for tuning in, and I hope to see you soon.